to our presentation, Compassionate Conflict Resolution in Nature Education. My name is Takako Kono. I'm here with my colleague, Yinan Liu. And as an introduction, I'm a lead teacher and program coordinator at Forest Explorers, a forest school in New York City. I studied public policy at Columbia University and have lived in New York since 2006.
Hello, I'm Yinan. I'm a lead teacher in Forest Explorer too. I graduated from environmental conservation education at NYU, and I came across the program when I was doing a project for my schoolwork.
Our agenda is as follows. First, we'll cover why we need a unique model of conflict resolution in nature education. Next, we'll share our approach, which is rooted in 3 premises: connect before you correct, redefine what peace means, and work to center safety and inclusion. Yinan will then use case studies to demonstrate our model in action with an eye toward concrete language and interventions. Finally, we'll talk about how to get buy-in from adults, educators, and parents alike. Before we begin, I want to introduce you to Forest Explorers. We are a drop-off program that runs 4 days a week at the Queens Botanical Garden in Flushing, Queens. We enroll children ages 2 to 6, with anywhere between 12 to 30 children per day, depending on the season. 3 BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, women, lead our program, and we educate predominantly children of color. One unique feature is our collaborative leadership system. This means we don't have a director or executive. Instead, all 3 lead teachers share responsibilities, which syncs with our commitment to being inclusive and non-hierarchical. And lastly, we employ a child-directed, place-based curriculum that centers equity and inclusion as core values. So why focus on conflict resolution in forest schools? Our interest in this topic emerged organically from teachers who requested more guidance. Many of our educators worked in traditional schools and were trained in a more discipline-oriented approach. In a forest setting and with our particular values, we felt these responses no longer fit. As a community, we wanted to unlearn old habits and explore a new way of being together and in nature. In order to learn a new way, we first had to look at the current context of conflict resolution in urban schools. Existing models of conflict resolution in urban schools often center on discipline, with zero-tolerance policies at the forefront. According to researchers Stinchcomb and Teskey, zero tolerance describes a philosophical approach to discipline. In practice, it means that when a child violates a school rule, they receive a punitive consequence, for example, expulsion, out of class time, or suspension. And these are predetermined consequences. It's important to note that even if a school does not explicitly adopt this approach, many common conflict resolution strategies are still rooted in it. For example, extended timeout, forced apologies, or exclusion from certain class activities. In the US, these policies emerged in 1994 with federal efforts to restrict weapons in schools. They expanded to include non-weapon related and non-violent behaviors, and then these methods spread across the country. This model assumes that certain and severe punishment will deter children from future misbehavior, and that in turn creates a safer learning environment. Furthermore, because consequences are prescribed, as in they're top-down and clear-cut, it's assumed that discipline will be fairly and equitably enforced. In other words, because there's less room for subjectivity, there's also less room for bias. However, a large body of research finds that zero-tolerance policies do not significantly improve student behavior. In fact, these policies contribute to disproportionate discipline of Black students. In 2014, the US Department of Education and Office for Civil Rights found that under these policies, Black boys are more likely to be suspended, and Black girls are more likely to be punished than female students of any other racial group. There is no question that this alone is reason to demand changes to the zero tolerance approach. And when you view this from a critical race feminist lens, it takes on another layer of urgency. Researchers Dorothy Detiri-Hines and Dorinda Carter-Andrews posit that zero tolerance policies do not promote acceptance of differences, ignore cultural capital each student brings to the classroom, and discourage critical thinking and creativity. Now, creativity, cultural capital, critical thinking, acceptance of differences, these are the heart and soul of nature education. Zero tolerance policies are often one size fits all, top down, and start with the solution. And we believe that this goes against the very ethos of our work. So that leads us to the question, what would a nature-based framework for conflict resolution look like? Well, you might know some of these terms on the page. We're going to go through each of them. So first, whatever this new model is has to be place-based. A new practice must emerge from the ground up, rooted in a specific community and its needs. Second, it has to be inquiry-driven. We need to first observe, ask questions, and try to understand before arriving at a resolution. And third, it should be child-led. As educators, our role is to establish clear, safe, and firm boundaries. And we trust that children benefit from actively participating in conflict resolution. When children are allowed to take the lead, they start to internalize what is right and wrong in context and in relationship to others and the earth. This, in turn, helps them develop the authentic self-discipline they need to respect others and be respected by others. With this groundwork laid, how would we describe Forest Explorer's unique approach to compassionate conflict resolution? Well, it's a living approach rooted in three premises. The first is that a just and inclusive model of conflict resolution must seek to connect before it corrects. Second, peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of thoughtful, restorative, and compassionate conflict resolution. Our goal is to help children move from empathy, which is self-focused, to compassion, which is concerned for the well-being of others. And finally, safety and inclusion are not negotiable for us. Before Yinan brings this model to life, I want to note one important caveat. We're sharing an approach that emerged from Forest Explorers. We can offer you our process and concrete tools, and each leader must adapt this approach to meet his, her, or their community's needs. We're not sharing a packaged product, but a set of practices that requires a human touch to implement. Also, we are not using real children's names in these case studies. Instead, we're using randomly generated gender-neutral names.
Thank you, Takako. Compassionate conflict resolution, even explained well in why, what, and how, still sound rather unusual as a way to approach children in conflict. So in this part, I will use mock scenarios, then talk about how we practice this approach in action by giving you examples of what language we use and what actions we take and why we do what we do. We find it helpful to break down the whole approach into practical steps for several reasons. First is to help ourselves to do the self-check-in after every incident. For example, we can ask ourselves, in my intervention, what works for the children and me, and which part didn't work? Did I miss something, or what more or less I can do next time? Secondly, it is helpful to provide consistency in the way we handle the conflicts. Everyone has a different style of talking and the use of body languages. It is important to avoid sending mixed messages to children, but still being authentic to them. Lastly, we would use this as a step-to-step guide, introducing new teachers to this approach during our trainings. The first two scenarios fall into a category where children use aggressive behavior like hitting, biting to resolve a conflict. To start with, I want to say that we believe aggression in young children is not simply a bad thing. Rather, it is the display of a child who is experiencing discomfort and their emotion is overriding the moment, so they can only act on their impulse. Instead of looking at aggression as a challenging behavior that children do it on purpose to hurt each other, we see it as the children's call for our help. And this can be an opportunity to connect with the children. Before we go into the resolution, there are things that can help us to determine what to do at those moments. Observation is the key. Our daily observation helps us to know and understand our children's temperament and developmental level. Also, in this particular matter, it will give us information about the behavior's frequency. For example, we can observe how often does this happen in this child? What did the child do? Is it a push or something more intense? And also we can observe is there a trigger that trigger the behavior. Every child is different in temperament and they're all raised by different parenting style. But we find all young children when they are having an emotional reaction, they will act on impulse. And oftentimes they do not know why they do that. So it is important that we don't jump into immediate judgmental description of what they just did, but try to help them make sense of what just happened. When you have basic information, these observations will inform your intervention. In this approach, our goal is to support children to develop the capacity to solve conflict. So we started by offering them minimal support. So they will have the opportunity to practice and learn. This can be explained by Vygotsky's zone of proximity. In this way, we scaffold children's learning towards a compassionate way to resolve conflict in their later life. So what is minimal support? It is what we need to hold our desire to fix the problem or fix things for the children and start from the most non-invasive way. For example, by getting close, get down to their eye level, then verbally tell them you are there and what you saw happened. And you don't need to do everything at the same time, but see what suits you at that moment. The reason behind this is to let the children know an adult they trust is here. And this provide emotional safety. And sometimes this alone is enough for them to stop and calm down. If the aggression does not stop, when you get close, you need to use your hand. You can hold up your hand in between the children or insert your body in between the children to help them stop. In this way, you can efficiently stop the physical harm and minimize the touch of the children whenever possible. And it is a way to model respect to other people's bodies, no matter what age they are. And in circumstances that you need to physically hold the children's body in order for them to stop, tell them what you will do, like, I am going to put my hand on your hand. Yet, if you observe that a child is stuck into a pattern of using aggression, you need to give them what they need by stopping their behavior before it happens or as soon as it happens. So this is a photo of me and my son because the term that I use to hold your body might have some different understanding. So when I say hold your body in the following test, I will mean that they'll get down to the children's level, cup your hands and gently rest them on the shoulder to contain the hitting or scratching. This way we can stop the child from hitting and also protecting ourselves. So let's go into the first scenario. Alex, age 3, found a stick and used it as a loudspeaker. Adrian, age 2.5, attracted by the sound and walks over to Alex, watches for a moment and then tries to grab the stick from Alex. Alex said, "No, this is my speaker." Adrian keeps trying and eventually has her hand at one end of the stick. Alex pushed Adrian away. Adrian fell on the ground, got up, and kept trying. Alex shouted, "No!" and started to poke Adrian with the stick. So this happened, and you as a teacher go over to them, see if they, so you can observe if they stop. And if they stop, you can tell them that you are there and you saw what happened, then moved on to the next step. If they didn't stop, you can proceed with the next level of intervention. You can hold up your hand, you can hold onto the stick and tell them that I am going to hold onto the stick so you don't get hurt. Then move to the next step. So the next step is to ensure the physical and emotional safety of both the children. Since you saw Adrian got poked, you want to check with her first. You can say, "I see Alex poked you with the stick. I want to check if you got hurt." This would allow the child to bring the attention to her own body instead of the adult just lifting up their clothes or grabbing their body to check. When physical safety is checked, we want to check in with their emotional safety too. I would use, at those moments, I would use sports casting as much as possible. The term sports casting is coined by infant specialist Magda Gerber to describe the non-judgmental gesture facts verbalization of an event. The reason is we try to use this as much as possible is that we notice that oftentimes this kind of mini commentaries are enough to support the children to persevere in a conflict or when they are struggling with challenges. And also, we want to avoid judgment or project our feelings as an adult in the event to make the children identify themselves as aggressor or victims. So when you are sure that there is no safety concern at that moment, and before moving into the next step, you can do a quick check-in with yourself. After the intervention, how do you feel? What do you want to do next? And if you feel like you are not physically or emotionally prepared to handle what is coming by yourself, and also if the situations allow, ask support from another teacher. After the quick check-in with yourself, we need to guide the event into an end by setting clear, concrete expectations. Instead of simply repeat the rules like, "Oh, hitting is not allowed here," I would say, "I won't let you hit." Also, I would try to avoid ambiguity as possible. Like I would not use the saying like hands are not for hitting or sticks are not for poking because these sayings are pretty vague, and also because the situation is this just happened, the children just hit or the children just poked. So using a first person honest direct language like "I won't let you hit" is very helpful and respectful. Also, instead of "How do you feel if someone pokes you?" I will say, "If someone else pokes you with a stick, I will stop them." This is to avoid inflicting shame in children and also provide us a chance to model for the appropriate reaction. You might wonder, is it the end of this thing? But where is the sorry? In Forex Explorer, we are intentionally not to force apology and hugs because we think a perfunctory sorry is not an authentic apology. It teaches children how to gain the benefits of apologizing for closure without addressing the situation of behavior. And this will remain the standard apology into their adulthood. Another reason why we don't force apology is that we think it is not age appropriate. A sincere apology requires understanding of how other people feel and prioritizing that other people's feeling. But for a young child in their pre-operational stage, age 2 through early childhood, their thoughts and communication are typically egocentric. Ecocentrism means the child's inability to see the situation from another person's point of view. So we could end the event this way. Thinking about the zone of proximity, again, we observe the children's readiness and guide and scaffold them in a developmentally appropriate way, like through consequences. We will ask them to look at another child's reaction. We can say, do you see if he's crying, if she's smiling, if he turning his body away from you, or is she holding up her hand to ask you to stop? For older children, we might ask them to listen to what each other has to say. And also, we can be a mutual mediator between them and narrate what we already know throughout the intervention. For example, in this scenario, we can say, Alex, you were using the stick as a loudspeaker, and Adrian is very interesting in what you are doing. She really wanted to do the same thing with you. What do you think we can do, Nia? What do you think we can do now? Or if one of the children is still very upset, we can model and say, what do you think we can do? And then let the children to come up with ideas. And surprisingly, they sometimes come up with all kinds of different answers. Some would say, why don't we go find a new stick together and use it as a loudspeaker? So sometimes you see children seem to be stuck with aggression, almost like this is their behavior pattern to react to certain things. Here is a scenario. Jamie, age 4, acts aggressively towards all children and teachers. Hit, bite, spit. You will observe his body tense up when other children get too close. And when he hits, he seems to have difficulty to stop, even when a teacher intervenes and hold on to his body. Afterwards, he will have tremble, or he will run away, or get into an emotional outburst and say he is a bad person. Like I mentioned earlier, if you already have observation in certain children that aggression is a persistent behavior, you need to help them to stop their behavior before it happens. For example, if you know something will trigger the behavior, as soon as you see that something, you see the trigger is happening, go to them and help them. If not, stop it as soon as it happens. Even though the children might not know why they act like this, they know what they did is considered wrong or bad. At those moments, the child is experiencing fear and they are in a defensive mode and could not stop themselves from acting aggressively. The aggression is an obvious call for help, for adult to help them stop. So helping them stop is the direct response to answer their need for security at those moments. You are the adult they trust and you have control over the situation. You can use your hand or insert your body between children in conflict, and sometimes it might involve more than two children, so make sure you protect yourself too. Also, try to narrate what you do as simple as possible. You can simply say, I need to help you stop. If you are touching the child's body, you can say, I need to hold your body. In situations like this, we usually would have two teachers go to the children because very likely once the children turns to check on the child who got hurt, the child um, who was hit will start hitting again. So it is important to have one teacher to focus on the child who got hurt and another teacher to focus on the child who acted aggressively. Usually it will take some time for them to stop. So during that time, we can just be with them. It is very difficult to do that because try not to fix a tantrum or try not to fix a meltdown and try not to reason with the child at that very moment is difficult for us to do. But remember, the child in a tantrum or in an emotional outburst, they would not be able to take in anything we say at that moment. All that matters to them is, are they safe? Do you care about them? Or will you let them finish the process? So when you see the child is calming down, you can try to make sense of what his behavior to him. This helps to bring the child back to the safety you are providing. You can say what you just saw. You can say, you didn't like it when she got too close, so you try to make her go away. This is a transitioning to the next step. So by letting children finish their process in a safe way, you are affirming to them that having emotion is okay, even though those emotion is so-called negative. But you also have to guide them in a socially appropriate way. So during the time of their struggle to stop, you can use the following language. You can, if the child speaks, you can and cannot stop, and you can say, "I am going to walk you to the bathroom." Or if you don't have a bathroom, you can say, "I'm going to walk you to a tree where you can speak safely." Or you can say, I see you are having a difficult time stopping, so I am going to hold your body. For some children, if they express that they do not want to be touched and wanted to be left alone and have a moment, you can make a decision according to what you know about the child and say, "Okay, I hear you. I will be right here," and make sure you have your space. And you stay close to the children and you stay where you are. Also, let other children and adults know that the child is needing some space. So after the child calm down, check in with them. First, check physically. Did they hurt him? Did they hurt themselves? And then you can check in with them emotionally. You can say, "Oh, I see you were so upset." Or you can simply ask, "How do you feel now?" This really has no script, but use your authentic care and curiosity and your personal style to do the check-in. For older children, you can even discuss with them, like, "Oh, do you feel okay when I hold your body?" Or you can say, "I need to help you stop. What can I do next time?" Offering them reasonable choice is helpful. You can say, "Do you want me to hold you or pick you up?" Involving the child to participate, they can feel empowering by taking control of the situation. It will be a long process for the child to unlearn their reaction to and learn another way. So we need a point person to stay close to the child and follow through with what you said. If you say you're going to be there next time, try really to be there. If you didn't get them in time, you can say, "I saw you were having a difficult time. I was not here to help you stop. I will try better next time." All the teachers will need to know about the situation, and if you are not available for the child, they will be there to support the child too. And it is important to notice any progress the child is making. If you see the child pause for 1 second before he raised the hand to hit, acknowledge that. You can say, "I see you stop before you raise your hand." Then they will focus on what they are already doing to help themselves, rather than just focusing on negative behavior and the feelings towards themselves. And don't feel bad for the child, and don't feel guilty if you have to hold them down at those moments to help them stop, because you are caring for them. Also, it is very important to communicate with the family, and it will be an ongoing conversation. Try to understand the context of the behavior. When did it happen? And if it's a sudden change in behavior, what changes happened in the children's life recently? And this is important because if the child needs help from, if the child and the family needs help from like a social worker or therapist, they will get that in time. So conflict also occurs in many other forms. The next scenario is less intense, but sometimes teachers will struggle with it a lot because it relates to discipline. Forest explorers take place in designated areas in the public garden. There are paved pathways, like you see in this picture. We call the garden streets. One of the most important rules of the children need to follow is to not run into the street or cross the street without holding an adult's hand. This rule is related to safety because in the garden we have gardening vehicle driving around. Also because it is a public garden, so occasionally we will have people who disregard the rule and just bike and skate on those paved pathways. For children who are new, we noticed that for children who are new to the program, especially children who are on the younger side, this has been a very difficult boundary for them to follow and take a long time for them to internalize it. So I will use this as an example. So what do we do if a child keep running into the street? First, unknowingly, and then having fun with just testing boundary with the teachers. So when this happens, if there's no immediate danger, we would not call out the child's name and ask them to stop. Instead, we would go to the child and get down to their eye level. If the child is doing something, we will stay with the child and see what the child is doing. Then use sportscasting to narrate what we see. We can say, "Oh, you are playing hiding in this bush." Or if the child is obviously playing a game with you, you can say, "Huh, I see you're playing a game with me." Then wait until the child has her attention on you. You can ask them to do what you want them to do with reasonable choice. For example, you can say, "I see it's fun to play chase," and then you wait for the child's reaction. And you can go on and say, "But you cannot go into the street. It is not safe." And then you pause again and wait for their reaction. And you can say, "I will not chase you near the street. We can play chase under the holly tree or up that hill." It is if it's a child trying to run into the street even after you put up your hands and blocking their way, he's still trying to find a way to go. You can block him and say, "We need to walk away from the street now. Do you want to hold my hand or should I pick you up?" So offering reasonable choice after you set the limit is allowing them to have certain control over something that they do not have control with. So even if they don't want to, this would invite cooperation. Sometimes as a teacher, when children have strong reaction to our discipline, we might feel unsure and uncomfortable because it's really hard to see them struggle in their tantrum. And the feeling of making them to do something they don't want to do sometimes will inflict guilty feelings in adult. In the next slide, I will talk about two considerations that would be helpful to prepare ourselves for those moments. The first one is to have a mental guide I adapt from the educaring approach called red, yellow, green light. Red light situation is non-negotiable. In our program, that will mean all the things related to safety and inclusion. Yellow light situation are negotiable. For example, sharing. We will not force sharing, but depending on the situation, we would come up with different levels of interventions that everyone would be able to accept. Green line situation is that both the teacher and the children have no problem with it. Like the children can run to the edge of the grass, but wait for the teacher to come to hold their hands. When setting limits, the adult need to be mentally clear of why they are doing what they are doing, because confusion, ambivalence, and guilt over discipline would cause persistent pushbacks, nagging, and testing. This all sound awfully time and energy consuming, but respecting and allowing children to be an active participant rather than a passive recipient is in making choices to follow rules supports the development of inner discipline and self-confidence. We do not want thoughtless compliances from children, but to help them understand why and guide them how. Their feelings are valid and their choices are important. Sometimes we all need to face and deal with things that we don't feel comfortable doing. Thank you. I'll give this back to Takako.
Now we ask an essential question. How do we educate adults in our community? We start with teachers. Teachers may arrive with old habits around discipline. We don't consider this a bad thing. It just means we need to reflect on what we bring to the table, if it works and supports our values, and if not, be open to change. This is a multi-step process. For us, it starts with hiring. Our hiring process includes shadowing, where job candidates observe a class in action and see how current teachers approach conflict. We also ask about conflict resolution and prior work with children during the formal interview process. Once a teacher is hired, we offer formal training during onboarding with case studies and role play. On a weekly basis, we have a team meeting, and there's designated time to debrief and strategize about conflicts or issues that came up. Importantly, teachers are encouraged to ask for help. I mentioned we use a collaborative leadership model, which creates a culture that is less hierarchical than traditional formats. This means that teachers and interns don't have to ask the boss for help or fear repercussions for not doing it right. Our lead teachers openly ask for help and support from interns and other teachers, modeling it for others. Next, how do we communicate with families? We explain our approach during required family visits. In order to gain admission to Forest Explorers, families have to spend an hour on site with us. We're able to explain our approach live and answer questions. We find this is much better than trying to do it over email or in any other form of written communication. It's really something you have to see in action. On the first day of class, we also have an orientation session where we debrief about this again with families. Next, we encourage families to volunteer with us. They can stay on site to see us in action and follow some teachers around to get the hang of some of our language. Third, we have ongoing communication. We talk to families during drop-off and pickup, and because a number of our families are not able to show up in person for either of those, we'll often send text messages or emails. We'll also send bi-weekly newsletters to families that recap any major things that came up. Lastly, we will ask a parent to stay on site if we really need their help. That way, the language and interventions we use are consistent at school and at home. We also readily collaborate with extended family, caregivers, as well as therapists and social workers, as well as anyone else who's part of the village that raises the child. We'll conclude with some final thoughts. First, it's important to monitor outcomes. We have to be vigilant about this. Our approach is fluid, so we need to monitor the outcomes to make sure certain children are not being excessively spoken to. Next, it takes a lot of time and effort to do this. It can never be put on autopilot, so you have to keep up the effort. Next, let the class change your approach. What worked last week may not work this week, and that's okay. Remember, we're looking at the child in the context of their environment, which changes over time, so it makes sense that our responses will change too. Finally, we want more rigorous research on outcomes. One reason zero tolerance policies were widely adopted is because they're easy to measure and scale. But like so much of the work we do in forest education, our outcomes are long-term, nuanced, and not easily quantifiable. We welcome additional research, which includes selecting the right metrics. I'm including our works cited pages here. And with that, we thank you for your time. You can email us at the addresses listed here. We look forward to the next opportunity to share ideas and learn together and hopefully take a nice long walk in the woods. Thank you.